Welcome to Designing Hollywood Podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I'm your host, Philip Boutte Jr. Designing Hollywood Podcast is a show dedicated to all things movies and its industry professionals. Today's episode is dedicated to the Netflix limited series Griselda and sponsored by the Western Costume Company.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Musali, the new president and CEO of Western Costume, welcoming Designing Hollywood back to Western. This is our men's tailor shop where we're custom making clothes all the time, alterations. This is our women's custom made. We can make anything you guys need us to make, alter anything. We can deck out a full army if you want in our military department. Thank you, Designing Hollywood, for coming in to see Western Costume. Hope to see you soon.
On today's episode, we have two very special guests, costume designer Safowa Bright Bitzelberger and production designer Knut Loewe. Safowa Bright Bitzelberger is a TV and costume film designer. Most recently, she earned an Emmy nomination for her work as a costume designer on Netflix Griselda starring Sofia Vergara. As a multidisciplinary creative and throughout her career in the industry, Safowa has worn several hats as a costume designer, wardrobe stylist, and costume supervisor. Beyond her work on Griselda, Safowa also worked on many acclaimed films like Ava DuVernay's Origin and TV shows including Ballers starring Dwayne Johnson and DMV starring Rosario Dawson. Safowa began her career in fashion design in the LA apparel industry, designing for several women's contemporary and junior apparel manufacturers. Her passion for the unique and avant-garde landed her in the LA editorial world and music industry as a wardrobe stylist, where she was able to refine her creative aesthetic. Knut Loewe is a film and TV production designer, and most recently his outstanding work has been featured in Netflix hit miniseries Griselda starring Sofia Vergara. He just completed another miniseries titled Murder on the Inca Trail and has worked on a biopic about one of the most successful German entertainers, Hans Rosenthal. He previously worked on many critically acclaimed TV series like Starz' Counterpart, created by Justin Marks, Survive, starring Sophie Turner, and BAFTA TV Awards-nominated BBC drama Sinking of Laconia, starring Brian Cox. He won 4 German TV awards and 2 additional nominations and was nominated twice at the German Television Academy Awards. Knut's credits in film range across various genres, including comedy The Pharmacist and period drama Cold is the Breath of Evening. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome costume designer Safowa and production designer Knut to the Designing Hollywood show.
Hi,
hello. Nice to see you guys. Thank you guys for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
So I want to get right into it.
We all to be here.
Thank you. Is there a moment in time that you remember thinking that this is what you want to do? So how did you get your start, and like when do you remember saying like, yes, I want to be a costume designer, or yes, I want to be a production designer?
Okay. Well, for me, I'd say that my love for design and art started very, very young. I mean, I was always the kid with the Crayola markers and Crayola crayons and drawing, whether it was, even in like first grade and all the way up. And that evolved into a love for design specifically and architecture. And I was convinced that I was going to go to architecture school and become an architect. And as I got closer to college age, I ended up, my father passed away, and it really, because I was young, I was barely 18, I think that it really sort of shocked me into this perspective that that life is short, and you don't really realize that usually at that age. Mm-hmm. And so I reevaluated things, and even though I had a love for architecture and had wanted to pursue that as a career, and with my father's blessing and my mother's blessing, I also had this love for fashion and design and building clothes. And that's also something that I did, but it was always a hobby and not what I thought could be a career. So I ended up going to university for fashion design. I worked in the fashion industry pretty much all throughout my 20s. And after a company I worked for shrunk and laid off, I got an opportunity to style a photo shoot. And I was like, oh, this is like the best of both worlds. And I found that I had an affinity for that. And so I sort of pivoted and became a stylist and worked in music videos initially and print. And then I sort of I started at the bottom again. I had to kind of eat a little humble pie. And this was like 20 years ago. I'm aging myself, and or dating myself, and there weren't as many resources to allow you to sort of pursue fashion costume as a career, and so it was all new to me, and I really had to forge my own path. And that's what I did. I started off at the bottom as working on independent films and shorts and all of these really things where you wore many hats, and I realize now that it allowed me to perfect my craft. And I think that that's something that allowed me to skip steps, is because I had had so much responsibility in fashion design in my 20s. And so I moved up, I got into the union, and I ended up designing, and then once I got in the union, shopping, and becoming a supervisor, and I'm very left and right brained. And then my design focus was a little bit on the shelf, but on the project that we're going to discuss, I was able to sort of jump out of that and pivot, and it really has renewed my love for design. And so I hope that's how it came to be. It was a sort of a little tricky path, but at the same time, it's how you land there. So there it is.
And you, Knut?
Okay, so it's so funny you say that, because there are quite a few similarities. I actually did go to architecture school, and I majored in architecture when I first started. And I started to work in an architecture practice, and at the end of the day, I was doing tile plans and floor plans and sewage plans and all sorts of things. And it was like, this is not really what I came for. At the time, I was living in Stuttgart, and ballet, opera, and the theater was a big thing. The Stuttgart Ballet was very big. Dennis Russell Davis was the director of the Stuttgart Opera. The Philip Glass operas, they all premiered in Stuttgart at the time. And I was friends with a lot of people who worked in the stage design department at the opera and at the theater. And I thought, oh, this is what I really want to do, because I didn't know anything about film. And Stuttgart is about architecture and ballet and the National Gallery and all of these things, but nobody makes films in Stuttgart. Eventually, I got in touch with people who were making movies, and I started off with commercials and pop promos, really. And then I realized I wanted to go into features. And with my architecture background and a bachelor in architecture, I couldn't go far. So I realized I had to do something to actually propel myself into the movie world. And I then went to graduate school at the Royal College of Art in London, and I majored in design for film and television. And that got me where I wanted to be. And on that note from Safowa, on hobbies, hobby is a very important thing. My grandfather always encouraged all of his grandchildren to turn their hobby into their profession. And his conviction was nothing else makes sense. Remember that. And I said, well, this is I like to do these little models, and I like to do these designs with light and play with shadows. And in retrospect, I would say that was my hobby already. I was doing these models and stuff all the time, playing around with what can you do with columns and how much can a column carry. And so I can say I turned my hobby into my profession, and I have been doing it since. Yeah, really.
That's incredible. I think that one of the things I'm going to put together, but for the audience, is just when you hear both of them speak, is there's a love for what they do, and there's kind of turning your passion into your actual career. But also, there was like stumbling along the way where you're like, I kind of want to do this, and you kind of throw yourself in a direction. You don't know exactly what you want to do, but you kind of find your way, right? There's very many. I find this fascinating for many ways because I started off as a production designer, moved into costume design, and I find the similarities between the two it's a similar process. They end up in different places, but the process is similar. And I've seen so many costume designers that actually went to school for architecture and switched. Which is an interesting thing. Or just someone that was like going to architecture school, wanted to do something that was like kind of like in the real world and then transitioned it over into fantasy and entertainment. So I think that those skills kind of carry through. One thing that I wanted to ask you guys before we start getting into the nitty gritty too was, when you're thinking about this is a career in terms of like and doing work that inspires people, are there any things, or what are your inspirations? Like, who inspires you? Like, when you're thinking about like film or television or entertainment, are there designers or people that you kind of like started watching that really inspired you to kind of like push forward?
Well, for me, I have a great love for costume design across the board. Obviously, Sandy Powell, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just amazing. I mean, all the way back to Orlando,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and Colleen Atwood, Gersha Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be able to create something from that you were literally creating, specifically in that realm of fantasy, sci-fi, I have great respect for and hunger for.
Yeah.
And yeah, Ruth Carter, of course. That's
truth.
On every level. Her creativity is just, she can do anything. She can do period fantasy, and so yeah, all of those designers and many more that aren't coming to mind, I think, and then also just my love. Another main thoroughfare through my life is a love for film, love for architecture, design, film, all of those things, interior design. I think that they all contribute and allow you to express your creativity in different ways, which is why I have a love for production design too, and great respect for Knut.
How about you, Knut? When you were thinking about film, like what kind of inspires you, or what do you think about?
Well, I'm not so much, I'm inspired by films, but I'm more inspired by fine art, by what I see on the street. If I just walk down the street, it might be a piece of garbage that somebody has been thrown away, and that forms a funny shape, and that funny shape inspires me to do something with materials that I haven't been working with. I mean, of course, when I talk about film, one of my biggest inspirations, or I'm a hero, or not a hero. I worship, I should say, people like Ken Adam, for instance, who designed all these iconic James Bond movies. But then he also went into 18th century and giving us a full portrait of what Baroque was like when he did Barry Lyndon, for instance. So the span from the 18th century to almost sci-fi, that is very something that I always looked up to, and I thought if he's one of the really great examples of our craft and what production design can do. And of course, there are so many other people and colleagues that I really admire for what they do. So for like a week ago, I met Sarah Greenwood, who designed the Barbie show, but then she also designed films like Atonement, war movies. And in Atonement, you have these stately homes, like in Barry Lyndon, 18th century England, which is like magnificent to the attention of detail that she puts on her work. It's just amazing. So if I meet people who do the same thing that I do, I'm constantly inspired by the work of the colleagues, because every single one of us does it differently and has a different approach. Oh, tell me, how do you do this? And so the inspiration never goes away. I leave the house in the morning and I'm inspired on my way to the subway.
Isn't that for both? Isn't that like the best feeling? I think that when I try to explain what it's like to be an artist, right, or to be someone that has inspiration, it's really hard to explain to people because it's literally it's everywhere in anything at any given point. And trying to explain to people how it can spark something, or the obsession, like you see one little like thing, like this trinket or something, and then now you're obsessed with that trinket and the colors and and then you're trying to expand it out. It's like something that just kind of keeps going and doesn't turn off. I went to the my wife.
Really.
Say it again.
It's 24/7, really. I have to stop myself from being that way. So I read books in the evening, even if it is only 10 pages before I go to sleep, that has nothing to do with my day job. So I can settle down and I can sleep and I can zone out, because otherwise I just never stop. I keep going.
It's a constant. I think it can drive people a little crazy. I went to the opera house when me and my wife went to go visit Paris. We went to a wedding and we were in the opera house, and I just was zoomed in, and I was just looking at the little markers on the back of the chairs that tell you the number. Yes. And I was like, that looks like a cool, like, Art Nouveau superhero collar. And then I was just obsessed with it, and I turned it into something. But it was like, I love that feeling. So I'm glad that you guys have that. And I'm going to transition that over into what we're here to talk about today, which is Netflix's limited series Griselda, which was a beautiful piece of work by the two of you. By all involved, but specifically the two of you. I really felt like you guys worked, brilliantly together. And I can tell that the passion for it, you really got into the nuances of this character. So I'm going to start first with Safowa, and I want to ask you, what was your initial vision for the costume design for Griselda, in terms of how did you want the clothing to reflect the characters, especially Griselda Blanco herself? Like, what was your first kind of initial feeling for that?
Well, I think that, first of all, I have to say that it was collaborative across the board. Of course, with Knut, but specifically with with Sofia very much, and our director Andres Pais, as well as Armando Salas, our DP. And it really meant a great deal to me to really listen to what Sofia wanted in how she was going to embody this character and completely transform herself. And it wasn't about, of course, the prosthetics assisted, but it really, aside from the limited prosthetics that she was wearing, from the neck down, it was all Sofia, and it was, and so when we discussed the evolution of the character and what we saw as she, left Colombia, landed in Miami, rebuilt her life, obviously and that was in the 70s time period. We really wanted, obviously, to honor that time period aesthetically through the fashions, right? And all the silhouettes and the color palette. But also, we really, really wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be a distraction from her performance.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't about, just fashion and having her finger on the pulse aesthetically and trend-wise. And I think that, as we saw her evolve and get more financial means for her to purchase anything that she wanted eventually, as we jump forward into the 80s. Even then, even though it was so tempting to put her in designer piece after designer piece, and even originally it was even scripted for the jump forward, that we visit her closet and it's designer piece after designer after designer, and she's in there trying outfits on. once we discussed it with Sofia, she really felt that that person, specifically Griselda Blanco, wasn't about fashion. Like, even though she had all of the money in the world, she didn't necessarily, it's hard to say, like, her taste level wasn't necessarily going to allow her to choose the right pieces. I'm being very diplomatic.
No, but that's a good point.
Right, and back then you didn't really have stylists. Now you could say, like, put me in everything, head to toe, like, you know, even if you don't have that taste level. But back then it wasn't about that, and so I think that was something that I had to reel in my desire, especially because I came up during the '80s, and my mom was really chic, both '70s and '80s. That I was able to get some of the pieces on her, but we definitely dialed it back, and I was able to express that through peripheral characters. It was very, very, very important to Sofia that she wasn't a paper doll, right? So yeah. Definitely.
No, that's super helpful, because I think that one of the things that people forget is, like, in the character building stage is also thinking about who the person is, and then making sure that the clothing doesn't overshadow them or distract the viewer. And I felt like there was a perfect balance there for your overall vision of what she was, and, like, she felt like a real person. She didn't feel like she was just out here just like overstepping the means of what it was. And also, she's dealing with really harsh things throughout the day. So that's also very difficult. I want to talk to Knut about the same kind of question. When you're approaching world building of this nature, and you're also in a period piece, right? And you're thinking about the sets and how to, like, manage the tones and stuff like that. How did you approach initially, like, kind of like getting the sets that you had and the locations that you had to match the overall tone of the story? Like, what was, like, your initial kind of thought process of, like, planting yourself in that world building exercise?
Yeah. So I wouldn't actually call it world building, because I don't think I built a world. It was more about storytelling.
I like
And
that.
from the world, there are several worlds already out there, and I was picking from what was there.
I like it.
Then we shot this series almost like a feature film, because we had one director and didn't have any armored sets. We were going from the 1960s to the 1980s. We had these flashbacks in Latin America. So there's a world already there. So I had to pick a certain piece of the world in Colombia that would portray that sort of character, and not so much the character, it's more the world that this character lives in.
Yes.
So she was a Colombian with a poor people's background that lived in Colombia with a lot of money after they were successful in the drug business, and then the business turned sour, and we know what happened then, and she had to escape to Miami, and she's trying to build a new life. So I was picking for the not so well-to-do people in Miami at the time. So I wanted to find things that were on one hand iconic for Florida and for Miami of the 70s. But I didn't want to use a great deal of pink, what you often see in shows that are actually set in Miami. Everything is flamingo pink, and I thought, well, I have to find something else to actually give the audience the feeling of what Florida was, and that surrounds the character. And unlike other shows that I have designed and other features, the sets that I was building around Sofia is almost like a piece of costume. And maybe this is one of the reasons why we worked so well together, because we were basically working on it. Strategically, we were doing the same, because we were trying to tell the story of Griselda, and so with the surrounding, with the clothes, with the colors, and the pieces of furniture. And it's exactly what Safowa was just saying. So if she would have been brought up going to museums and what posh people do, she would know where to get Italian designer furniture and all of that. But she doesn't know that world. She was never introduced into the designer world. So she doesn't care how much things are costing because she doesn't have to look for the price tag. But then she doesn't know where Knoll furniture or where Vitra furniture. She has never heard the name Charles Eames or any such thing. I mean, all of the symbols that we are using to tell other people how successful we are and what good taste we have. She didn't have any of that. So we were left to work with a completely different toolbox from what we usually would be working with. So if I do a period film that is set in the 18th century, I can go for Chippendale furniture and everybody knows what's going on. So here deliberately we were looking for elements, for pieces, for icons that nobody can read in this way. So if you have a piece of a settee that was designed by Mies van der Rohe in the 1920s, you come from a well-to-do background. She didn't. So, but what she's doing, and we have a progression over the 6 episodes of the show, she's going from well-to-do Colombia into poor Florida, Miami, and then she's starting from scratch. So I was, as a designer, I was very happy, and I think the same thing applies for the progression of the costume design. That she starts off with very little money and then she gets more and more and more and more. So the houses that she's occupying just go bigger and bigger and bigger, but not necessarily nicer. They just go bigger.
Yeah.
Her cars go bigger. So in the first couple of episodes, you see her running around in a borrowed Toyota that is barely doing the trip and almost falling apart. So once she has money, she buys herself a Mercedes. This is something that she can read, a 450 SL with a 6.9 liter engine, which was the biggest piece and the most expensive piece of Mercedes that you could buy at the time. These were the quotes that she was able to read. But don't ask her who designed that bloody car. She wouldn't know.
I want to give you guys all the props in the world because you've now, between the two of the answers that you just gave, you filled something in for me that I noticed when I was watching, which is the two of you together, based on like even the color palettes that you chose for the sets, right? And then Safowa, you were doing like prints and things like that. The two of those things together, which I didn't notice until I was watching it, created depth. It wasn't flat. So it wasn't flat, but it also wasn't expected. Like the pinks and all the neon and everything that you expect from that wasn't there. But I also did notice there were a few scenes that I noticed, especially when she was like doing really well, right? Where she's wealthy. Now I noticed it from a set decoration standpoint, just looking at what was around her. And I'm like, it's just, she has more things, but they're not nice things. It's just, she has more things. And I was like, that's such a good thing. Cause it could have gone where it's like, now there's marble and there's all this stuff and like all the fancy stuff, but it just felt like you said her environment got bigger and it felt like she was responsible for more people and also way more stressed out because she couldn't trust anybody. And that those two things together, between that and then how you created the depth, really helped. Just it doubled down and told the story again. So like it was such a cool, that's just a cool thought process. So I'm glad you guys brought that up. And while we're on that, I do want to talk to Safowa, can you talk about how you went from kind of having her using the clothing to have her go from like small time crime to like this like massive drug lord?
Right. Yes.
Like talk to me about that a little bit.
I think that, and that's something I didn't mention earlier, is that it's not just that she had more money. She also had power.
Correct.
Right? Because just because you get more money doesn't mean, it was very specific to her role as left. And so that was also tied to it, whatever she's wearing not being distracting, right? But yes, I mean, obviously, when she landed, as Knut said, she did have money in Colombia, but she was the wife of someone who had money, right? And she was involved in the drug business, but peripherally. And then when she, she really wanted to be the boss, and when she came to Miami, she started with nothing, and she was almost borrowing clothes. She only had enough time to really throw a brick of cocaine in her suitcase, some jewelry, a few outfits, and she landed with very little. And so we really wanted to start off and reflect that even what she's wearing, maybe, she borrowed it from Carmen, and she's kind of not, she's trying to fit into this box that Carmen expects her to, because she started her life over and is going down a clean path, but she had her eyes on something else, right? And so as we see her move up, she's still wearing definitely pieces that are dedicated to that time period, the jeans, the wrap dresses, all of those pieces, the prints, the DVF prints, all of those things. But as we see her move up, she first of all doesn't suddenly, as she moves up with power, start wearing pantsuits and suits. That's something that she also really did not want to do. As we wanted to be able to honor the fact that she can have as much power wearing a skirt, suit, or a dress. It's not about her emulating a man in that respect. She didn't need to do that, obviously. And I think that as we see her evolve, and it also jumps into the next decade, there really is only a 3.5, 4-year jump at most. We're not talking about 10 years. She builds such a powerful and financially solid, in the billions, in that time period, the billions, right? She builds this business, right, in such a short time that I don't even think it gave her enough time to evolve and have her taste level get elevated. I also think it wasn't in her purview. And I think that one of the things that hopefully is reflected both in the costume design as well as the production design is a grittiness. Even as we move up, even as she's at her waterfront mansion in Miami, there's still this, there's more of everything, and they have better cars, and obviously the boys are in like all of the trends from that time, but there's this grittiness and shadow on everything because of her path and because of the people that she's surrounded by. We're not talking, even if she had her hand in politics, in real estate, in banking, everything, still, the people that are coming to her party, they're part of that world, that underbelly.
Yeah.
That although there was a resource of research that we had for the 60s, 70s, 80s, specifically for Miami, and even when we stayed away from that pastel Miami Vice palette that is tied to the 80s as well as the 70s too.
Right.
It also was about that there was an endless amount of research for those time periods, but there was not a lot of represented photos of that group, aside from law enforcement photos specific to court or, mugshots. And so that's where we had to piece it together like this like a puzzle. And that's where we really wanted to be able to honor the vision of the director and Sophia when we approached it from our creative standpoint, whether costume or production design, if that makes sense. So.
No, it really does. It shows in what you guys did. Because there's huge moments. Everything felt like it was mired or like it was stained, right? So yeah. I felt like even when she was doing at her best, watching it made me super anxious because I was just like, something's going to happen. Someone's going to come. Like, you always felt like there was something there. And I feel like you can see it in kind of the way you guys designed. Even down to the point where it was like, when you talk about the fanciness, it's like, she's at this thing and like the fancy thing that she's got this gold gun, right? And then she shoots at the car, but it's like that, but all of the actions in that scene are so gritty and like, there's like the thing. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about too is, how did you balance the fact that she's kind of known as a person or as a character for kind of like this luxury mixed with extreme violence, or just like kind of like, that part? Like, how did you think about that in terms of your design when you were approaching it?
She's not only a drug dealer, and one of the reasons why we first got into this story, and presumably why Sophia herself wanted to make that story, is it's so unique on so many levels, because she's a woman that puts her foot into a man's world to do drug dealing in the 70s. That was men's business. Women didn't do that. Then the other thing is she is a single raising mother with 3 boys, again, how can in the 1970s mothers were staying at home doing the lunch and the dinner, waiting for the kids to come home, supervising the homework. So they weren't entrepreneurial busy. So she built up the enterprise. She built up this huge business, and being a single mother, and being a woman in a man's world, and being a foreigner in a strange country, so I mean, she was a criminal after all, and the real Griselda Blanco was a horrible person, but the series doesn't focus on all the horrible things that she has been doing in her life. The series actually portrays her as a mother, as a loving mother of her kids. And when she goes completely crazy in the party episode, which is the 5th episode, where she has taken too many drugs herself, you can still see her as a protecting mother, and because she completely freaks out on the reason that somebody was saying something funny to one of her boys, and she wouldn't accept that, and she completely overreacts. So what I was doing with the locations there, I was scouting and designing for her to surround her. She was trying to create a home. I mean, let's face it, she killed the father of the boys, and then she ran away to a foreign country. So following her mother instincts that were still there, despite the fact she was a successful drug dealer, she was always eager to build a home for the boys and to create a safe space for the boys. So this is some element that was driving the production design decisions, because we were creating homes, and it was so weird to create a home that of a drug lord that is killing people. And nevertheless, she runs a family. And in episode 3, when for the first time she has her own house, and she brings back the fish for the aquarium for the little boy, we actually see them how they have dinner together, and how she's trying to hold it all together. But then the drug business takes over, and obviously she doesn't have so much time anymore to take care of the family, and the family is maybe important, but it doesn't take up so much time anymore. And this is where the production design moves into another direction. Now we are in the nightclubs. Now we are in the areas where she does business. Now we have car chases on the street. This is when the little boy gets killed of Chucho, and all of a sudden we move outside, and from episode 4, 5, and 6, if you think about it, we have so many more exterior locations.
There was a lot more. That's right.
So 1, 2, 3, we are more interior locations, and all of a sudden the thing changes. But then my intention was that the production design should underline these aspects, what I was just telling about. The production design is supposed to give you information that is not scripted about the characters. And we don't only see Griselda, we see other characters as well. There's this opera lover who has impressionist paintings in his apartment. So he obviously had another upbringing, but I never wanted the production design to become too important. The overall production design decisions were made to keep the production design as a support, but remain in the background.
Yes.
So I didn't want to go too exaggerated. I mean, I think about the architecture of Calatrava or Zabriskie Point or something, you can have something that is spectacular, but then the architecture is more important than the scene that takes place within. So that was one of the important factors to always use the design. And I think this is the same thing what the costume does is support it. And when you look at the costume and the production design together, sometimes we are contrasting colors and sometimes we go tone in tone. When so for instance, when she is in this house that is an abundant house that she has basically squatted, there we have a lot of tone in tone and we don't have contrast. Everything is in blues and grays. And when she's building her army, color is no longer important. And then you have other episodes where you have contrasting colors, where the next level becomes important, and then we have contrast.
Safowa, can you speak to that a little bit? I legit love this. This is my favorite part. No, I do. It's like my favorite part of design. It's so cool.
Well, I agree with everything I would expect with Knut, and I do think that our collaborative approach is really what allowed there to be balance. And even as we jump forward, if we decided to not jump on the traditional colors, say, for example, of Success in Miami, pretty pastels, happy, you know, all of that, I think that we were able to reflect that by pulling back a little bit, but still having touches of it. And I was able to get away with that a little more in the 80s. One thing that, as Knut was describing her as a mother, as a wife, as a powerful business owner, you know, and kingpin, I think one of the things that when you mentioned that there was always something a little off and there's that overlying tension, it's almost like there was a filter, right?
Yeah.
That I really want to speak to her, the fact that she came from such a dysfunctional background, living in a brothel, everything that brought her to that point of even meeting her husband and sort of seeing that she could run the business better, but never being able to be given the respect or power or flexibility to do that, right? And the misogyny that she had to fight through, like literally, to even make it to the level that she made it. But despite that, as we see her even move forward with all of the financial means that she built, there was always something off, right? A little bit. And I think that is tied to her dysfunction of her background. So even as she's trying to build this life for her children and her family and even be a wife, she didn't really have any good examples. She didn't know how to be a mother, really, in many ways, because of her upbringing and because of that lack of support that she had at such a young age. And I think that is what's tied to her even not making the right choices, beyond her desire to be powerful and to have this mega billion-dollar enterprise. And so I think that's something that was echoed even in what she selected as she had all the means at her disposal and what she selected and chose to wear. And so that's something that was another thing that was very, very, very important to reflect both aesthetically in her selections and even on the people around her, right? Even her husband, as he had stepped into more means, right? And was really coming from the support function as, you know, a pistolero, right? That she made her husband, and she, I think that I even remember when we were discussing his evolution as the character. We decided to not again have it be about trend. It was really about almost keeping some of the elements that he had silhouette-wise, but pushing them forward and having it be about the fabrication and not having it be about trend. And that he's wearing a beautiful shirt, a beautifully tailored shirt, a beautifully tailored pants, beautiful leather loafers and dress shoes, but it's not about trend, it's not about label, it's not about designer. And And that's something that I hope was subtly reflected.
It was reflected because I picked up on it. I picked up on him being kind of the same person,
Yeah.
but his tailoring, the way his clothes looked like they fit better, but it wasn't like he was wearing a different type of shirt. He had like a similar style to what he had. It just was
Right.
it was a better version of it.
Right. Yeah, better
Better fabrication, but it wasn't like he changed where he's like, now I'm wearing this whole other thing. You could see it in the clothing and in the set design. And one of the things that I want to give you guys credit to too is talking about the push and pull back. It's like the perfect balance of like, if you see a band and all the musicians are really listening to each other and playing together, it's so much better than if there's one instrument that's super loud or where you're like, wait, what's going on? Or it like throws you off. It felt to me in watching it, when you're talking about even how the character, like how Griselda is as herself and kind of watching her development, the tricky part and the psychological part with what you guys did and how you kind of pushed and pulled back and you're playing with what we as the viewer see and what we don't see. It felt, I make this correlation often, but like in good storytelling, it felt like if you've ever watched the show Walking Dead, it's so much more about people than it is about zombies, that when the zombies show up, you're shocked. Like, you're like, wait, there's a zombie? Like, because you're so invested in the actual characters, right? So I was having that moment. The anxiousness would come where I would actually have moments where I liked her. And I was like, oh, I like her. I shouldn't like her because she's awful, but I like her. And I'm like, oh, she's just trying to do good for her family. And then she goes and decides that someone needs to die. And you're like, what? Like you're shocked by it, right? And I think that has to do with the design, because the design is subtly kind of pulling things along, but then you're shifting focus. The muted kind of color palette thing where you're talking about tone on tone versus contrast, what that does to it is it kind of lulls us into these places. And then there's like this big explosion that happens, or something jarring happens, and you feel like you're falling for it each time. So I could see that in you guys' designs, and it felt really palpable when you're watching the actual show. So it's a good testament to you guys as artists, but also as storytellers. So I like the fact, I really love the term of like swapping out world building with storytelling, because it's so real and you were pulling on real things. Did you guys, I want you to talk about a little bit about the research process. How much did you really pull or try to pull from the actual story itself? And like, were there like pictures? Did you go research things? Like, give me a little bit of a backstory of how you were able to kind of ground this in something, a real event, but like make it your own.
Knut, or?
Well, either of you can take it. I'm just fascinated by this.
We did do a lot of research, but we didn't do a documentary on Griselda Blanco.
Yeah.
So it was based on a true story. Yes. And then, as I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be right. It needs to feel right.
Correct.
And there's a difference, because sometimes you work with a pattern or with a color palette that is completely wrong for the time, but it feels right for the scene and it feels right for the environment that you would like to create. And then I must also give credit to Andy Bites, the director we worked with, because he didn't go by the rule book, and he offended a lot of people because he did a lot of things that are not done in union terms. And same thing applies for me, probably, because so many things I did were a simple union violation, because it's usually not done like that. So I remember one day, and we were still in prep mode and doing all our research, and he came running into the art department. He said, come on, you must all come into my office. And everybody looked with a stern face, and well, he means you are the designer, so you must go. No. He wants
like all of you. Yeah.
So he invited the set decorator, Kim Leonard. He invited the art department coordinator. He invited the graphic designer. He invited the set designers, the draftspeople, even the PAs. Come into my office. And he was inviting us all to join the party. And then he was literally dancing in his office, telling us what kind of movie he wanted to create, what kind of story he wanted to tell, what kind of character he wanted to portray, what was important for him. And he had stacks of books on his desk. I mean, the the office was not very nice. It was just we all had to be in individual rooms because of the pandemic. We weren't allowed to share rooms. That was a little bit of a bummer. But he invited us all into his office, and nevertheless, and he was so enthusiastic about everything. And if you find anything, just let me know and talk to me. And a lot of people were completely puzzled. And we walked back to the art department and they said, well, we don't usually talk to the director like that. And usually the director doesn't talk to us. The director needs to talk to you and you need to tell us. And I said, well, he's a foreigner, I'm a foreigner. Maybe things are different, a little bit different here. So don't worry. And that spirit was carried. Because of the pandemic, we almost worked an entire year on the show. I mean, we had 90 shooting days. That was a little bit of something. And then we were shooting in almost in order. I mean, we did the first 3 episodes and then we had a break and we started to prep the 1980s episodes. So we almost pretty much shot in continuity. I mean, places like the Mutiny nightclub, which was partly built in the Queen Mary ocean liner in Long Beach.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was a location where you could only go once because it was such a massive piece of work and with hundreds of extras and
Oh my God.
it was the full Monty, so we couldn't do that several times, but everything else was pretty much in continuity. So we never stopped with research. We always picked up something, whether it was about the Cuban society in Miami at the time that influenced parts of the American society, and they brought in their food, and all of a sudden white people were eating enchiladas and they liked it, and things like that, and there was a little Cuban square which unfortunately doesn't appear in the movie. But I can't tell you specifically how the research went, because to me it felt, and maybe you share that, Safowa, with Andy being from Colombia and with Sophia being from Colombia and we all being so close with each other, we lived the story for an entire year. And every time we picked up something, it's we were in it. It's almost like method acting. I didn't zone out. I was in the 1980s in Miami, more or less for a year. And I mean, ever so often I was going down to the costume department that was on another floor, and we were going crazy because that was a safe space. So Safowa's little office was behind all the racks. So when you came into the costume department, you couldn't see each other. You couldn't see us. So and the same thing was with Andy. Andy was so open for ideas, and so the research almost felt like we were playing tennis. Now the ball is in your court. Oh, I have this idea. I have that idea.
Yes, yeah. You know, we might find something that we thought that that Knut would be interested in, or set decoration, and vice versa. And he's right. I mean, it was unprecedented because I'm trying to think. We started. Costume started in August of 21, and we were supposed to start shooting in November of 21. And then in September, Netflix, they wanted to retool the scripts, so they put a pause button, but we stayed. Okay? So myself and a small team stayed, and we just the rest of our crew, we sort of pushed the pause button for them to start a little later than we anticipated. And so it was unprecedented that we were able to have this uninterrupted time to really get centered, because in this day and age, you barely get any prep.
Yeah.
So we almost had the prep that you get for a feature. And it was helpful and amazing, and it did allow for us to not be pulled in the direction. Usually you're prepping, but you're also going to meeting after meeting after meeting, and it keeps you from being able to create a momentum. And I think that allowed us to create a momentum, despite the time of the pandemic and, like Knut was saying, sort of being chopped up and separate. And we took over a whole floor at the studio that we really created. It was an endless amount of racks and racks and racks. And we really did do a deep dive of research, whether it was sitting and just watching films from the 70s and 80s and being inspired by that, looking at periodicals, publications, catalogs. That is something that, oh my God, they're so helpful. Even mundane catalogs, not just fashion magazines, obviously, but I'm talking about this is what real people are wearing, not a fashion magazine, right? So, of course, you love, all these beautiful fashion magazines from the 70s and 80s, but really, what was a great resource were newspapers and catalogs, Sears catalogs, JCPenney catalogs, all of those things, especially because of the range of characters and range of people that we were going to represent, and have it feel real and gritty, and like Knut was saying, that it is going to complement the storyline and not detract from it, and it's really going to sort of be there and feel like it is this foundation that you can build the story on. So yeah, we were fortunate. Oh my God, we had, with the mood boards and the concept boards, we were able to send them out to vendors, and I remember Knut coming down and going, oh my God, how did you get, within a week? I mean, we did damage, okay? It was well, I guess we have so many boxes on the way, but and they're like, oh, okay, you just stay. Okay, you guys just stay and
just keep working.
I was like, yeah, and we really did. And there were these boxes. I remember our UPM going what the shipping, huh? And I go, yeah, but the pieces inside are so affordable. We have to get the pieces here. The other thing is that concurrently there were period shows happening at the same locally. So the costume houses were cleaned out, and you would go see a rack. It would be cordoned off, okay, like a rope, right? For your viewers that might not be familiar with it, but it's cordoned off. It has a show name, and you're like, and you see this piece, this jacket, this dress, and you're like, they have so much of everything, but hands off. And so we threw that net out wide. So we had vintage vendors from the East Coast, from New York, from upstate New York, from the Midwest. Oh my God, we got amazing pieces that hadn't been picked over, sent to us boxes after boxes after boxes. Amazing vintage vendors. Our shoppers went to vintage shows. We had amazing resources. We had this amazing resource of this gentleman that had access to socialites and these rich women, whole closets. I mean, it was amazing. You would get this box and it would all be in one size, right? Well, range of sizes for most women have a range of size, right? But in general, amazing pieces, pristine, and they had just barely been worn. And I was able to even do that for the 80s. And I will tell you that because we dialed back on Griselda's aesthetic and not having her be this finger on the pulse, designer, Givenchy and Chanel and, Escada and all of these things, is piece after piece on the rack, pristine, beautiful vintage pieces. Fortunately, we were able to get them on a few on her, but peripheral. It was amazing, and it was just such a testament. And of course, we cleaned out the rental houses, and those pieces are so precious. And when you think that they've been around for so long, you feel this burden, right, to protect them. And I'm sure that happens with furniture and with other pieces that you use for set design. And I think that all of those are inspirational. I mean, it really can be one photo, one image from a film. It can be an accessory. It can be, we had a wall covered with accessories just pinned on the wall, and even looking at that was inspirational. And you would get one idea just a bangle or a necklace. And so it was collaborative. It was an extremely creative environment, and I think that and it was this little bubble we were in. I really agree with Knut. We lived it, and we were on the production from August to July, pretty much. Yeah. August to July, and the wrap took months.
That pandemic bubble was a real thing, especially working like doing Netflix shows and stuff like that, and having prep time. I know I want to advocate right now for the two of you, but also just in general for because we have producers that watch the show too, in the fact that they had prep time. Prep time is so important, especially when you're figuring things out. And I think that if you really look at the work, like, because we're all in this, it's an art form, right? Yeah. It showed on screen. The prep time that you guys had and the fact that you were all together in this kind of like almost like a camp, like summer camp of just like being together. I think the work shows on screen and how cohesive it is. And I think also too, you just can't avoid, we always laugh about it. It's the rental house curse, which is no matter what time period you're doing, there's always at least two shows doing the exact same time period at the same time. Currently, I'm doing an animated film that takes place in 1923 London. So I'm designing a film, costume designing, right? But guess what show is also going at the same time when I went to Western Costume? Janie Bryant's 1923. And it's 1923 London. And so all of the clothing was being taken. And I was like, oh my God, like even I'm doing virtual clothing. And even then there was two shows happening at the same time with the exact same time period. So I think that that's just a funny coincidence.
It is. And one thing I didn't mention was the amount of custom made because of that.
That's what I wanted to ask. Yes.
Out that we would, and talking about creative inspiration, and we had so much made to order, made custom pieces, duplicated from one vintage piece, and then sourcing out period fabric, printing fabric, over dyeing it, tinting it so it had that feel from that time period. And what we were able to create and slide in, I think, hopefully you weren't able to notice that. Hopefully you didn't know that it was a period blazer, but then the pants were all made to order, or vice versa. And that was definitely an important and impactful element. And we were very fortunate to have exceptionally talented artisans and custom-made cutter fitters, pattern maker fitters, ager dyers, accessory makers. We were able to have shoes made. We were able to knock off a broken belt that we found that, you just love it, but the buckle, it doesn't work. Well, okay, we'll cast it, And so we were really able to tell that story and have it feel authentic, even though we weren't able to have every period piece. We were able to replicate them, or because there were so many stunt scenes and a lot of killing, a lot of blood,
lots of multiples.
You can't damage a beautiful, pristine, one-of-a-kind rental, even if there were multiples. You can't do that. Right. So that was another reason why we had to be able to replicate these pieces, have them look authentic, and make them, or occasionally buy reproductions that are reflect that time period or inspired by, like with jeans, certain jeans in the cut, we were able to find some contemporary pieces that would have fit perfectly in there. And but we also had many custom pieces made for Sophia and for Ruby and many of the characters. And hopefully you couldn't tell.
It was seamless. And I wanted to ask, because Knut brought it up too, I had a similar question. You guys both answered a question I had, which was, you're talking about multiples, and because I was going to ask you about all the blood and stuff, and the fact that I know you had to make a lot of custom pieces. Yeah. But then Knut, you were talking about how you had to build that set within the Queen Mary, like, so it was like kind of like a set piece in itself. Did you have any other sets that you had to like physically build, like where it kind of, because they like, that's the one thing that I couldn't tell watching it, is it all seems seamless. I can't tell what's a set, what's a location. It's all together.
We had a huge stage throughout the show, and the schedule was in and out the stage, because in the first 3 episodes we have quite a few hotel and motel rooms, and the real motel is so small you can't shoot in there.
Correct.
So we had the exterior was an actual motel, but then the interior was built on stage, and a lot of the interiors were actually built on stage. So and we needed for the action sequences, we needed wild walls so that the camera would actually be able to move around. So all that was construction. Even the part of the house in Colombia in the flashback, where she, after she killed her husband and then runs away with the children, that bathroom was built because those houses they have so small bathrooms you wouldn't be able to actually shoot a scene in there. So when the gushing wound and all the blood in the beginning, that needed a surrounding that would serve as a, let's say, as a passepartout. In episode 5, for instance, the mansion where she blows up Dario's Cadillac with a golden machine gun, that house isn't so big. So the entire first floor, the entire second floor was all built on stage. The master bedroom, the closet where she has the fight, the glass-fronted cabinets where she has... And again, it comes down to what kind of fashion does she wear. She's not so much into fashion. She doesn't have Yves Saint Laurent and Givenchy and designer clothes, but she has a lot of no-name clothes. So we wanted this. It's like 25 yards running of rods in the dressing room. But then if you look at the, so she's got an entire suite upstairs in that house, but the actual house where we shot the party scene outside in the garden, that house wasn't so big. And her master bedroom is probably anything between 2,000 and 3,000 square feet, only the master bedroom. But the original master bedroom in that house would probably be anything closer to 350 square feet.
Right.
So we blew it up tenfold. But if you look at it, we kept it small on the note that Sofia doesn't, or that Griselda Blanco doesn't have that background. I mean, she occupies this 2,500 square foot master bedroom with her home office, with these golden food dogs left and right on her desk that are supposed to symbol her power and what kind of enterprise she's running from her bedroom upstairs. But then if you look at the bedroom itself, it's actually rather small. There's not that much space because if you grew up in a stately home, you're used to individual rooms that are 500 square feet each, and you're very comfortable with the size. But if you grew up, as Safowa mentioned, in Brussels, I mean, her mother made her become a prostitute with the age of 12. It was brutal, and she didn't even have a room on her own. So all the rooms where we have Griselda Blanco, I never oversized them because they should be a little bit too tight for what is happening in there. And that is part of the concept that you don't really read it, but you feel it.
Yeah. There was a, I'm losing it. There was a scene that I wanted to talk to you guys about before we kind of end. Like just something, because it felt like the perfect kind of correlation of like the entire story. It's the scenes with the empty pool. That empty pool, like just kind of.
We had several empty pools.
Or like the empty pools. I think it's when all of the women first get there and they're like standing outside of the empty pool.
This is after she gets kicked out from her friend.
Yes.
And she moves into a motel with the boys, and she's trying to create a home for the boys, but the hotel is so cheap that they can't even fill the swimming pool.
It was that. It was like they can't fill the swimming pool. So it's like everything has the promise of being nicer, but it's not. And then even like having all of the women around, like their costumes stuck out because there's nothing to look at, right? It's just this empty pool and these women. Like, so it just felt like that scene to me, or that type of thing, even when she's standing out and she's riling up the army and they're all outside, and like the levels, like of where the people are, and some are on trucks, like the leveling and how she's kind of rallying them no matter where they are. The levels that you guys played with there and the color palettes, it was just like the emptiness of it just felt like it was the perfect kind of like, I don't know the right word, but it was like the perfect like synergy of what the story is versus like where she's going. It kept foreshadowing what was happening. It's like no matter what you do, no matter how big this thing is, there's always going to be something slightly off with it because you're doing the wrong thing. Like it just was such a cool, like the visual of it was cool. I just liked it.
The Palm Beach mansion that she occupies, or that she squats with, where she builds the army. Again, this is a house that hasn't been lived in for 10 years. And the wallpaper is coming off, the pool is empty, and then she's using the empty pool to to burn the cocaine of her enemy.
Yeah. Those scenes just really rang true to me. And I think it's because of all the work that you guys did and what you were talking about and how you were pushing and pulling things. But they're so subtle that I feel like if you're just watching it, it allows you to just watch it. But if you're like paying attention to it like I was like, wait a minute. And I could tell that there was purposeful things in there. Or like you said earlier, Knut, like between the two of you, there was design that you guys were thinking about that may not translate to the audience, but it needed to be there, right? Like there's certain things that just have to be there. Just when you're designing, just so you know, like you may know it, we might not get it, but it makes it feel right.
Yeah, definitely.
So I enjoyed that. Well, coming to a close on this, I wanted to talk a little bit, or have both of you talk about it, because you have these careers and you've done such a beautiful piece of work. Can you leave our audience with something to shoot for in terms of like, we talk about training and we talk about getting into the industry and we talk about creating these things. Is there some piece of advice that you would give like your like past selves, or like a student that's kind of trying to come up and wants to aspire to do work like this?
Okay, there are two ways of getting into the industry from my point of view. And my advice to the students, and I'm also teaching in several schools, so I do meet students that ask me the same question, and I have to think about the question. So I tell the students, you have to find out which way you want to go. So way number one is you work your way up. So you have a majored in architecture, or you have become a woodworker or a tippie or something, and then you start in the construction department. Then from there you become a PA, and then you become a junior draftsman, and a draftsman eventually you become a junior art director, and eventually you become an art director, and eventually you become a production designer. And you have to be comfortable with working your way up, and because you learn a lot as you go along. So this is one thing, and it's about your very own chemistry. That does not apply for everybody. You have to find out whether your chemistry works for that. The other thing, and this is plan B, and this is what I did, for instance, is you always do what you want to do. So I have never been a set decorator. I've never been an art director. I have always been a production designer. So the first pieces I production designed were student movies for absolutely no money. They were short movies. They were pop promos. I did shop window decoration. I did styling for photo shoots. But I was always in the driver's seat. I was always the designer. The projects got bigger, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. But I have never worked my way up, and I felt comfortable with being a freelancer from day one. And this is another thing. So version number A is you're being employed with a company, you get your salary, and yeah, you get promoted by the company or by a line producer or by a production manager who really likes you, and they come over and they say, oh, your drawings are so beautiful, why don't you want to become a concept artist? And from a concept artist is not so far to become a production designer. If you feel comfortable, fine. If you are comfortable with being freelance and don't have extra security and not being permanently employed with a company, it's a chemical thing, and every student or everybody who wants to go into this direction needs to find out for themselves what kind of person they are, and what kind of progression, what kind of promotion, what kind of success would fit. So I was doing a workshop in Nairobi in Kenya. It was another Netflix show, and the idea was to work with local people, create their own local stories, have local actors and everything. And I was only the guidance of the art department. So I did a workshop for people who wanted to get started in the industry. And I said, what do you want to become? And everybody said, I want to become a production designer. I said, okay, this is interesting. So we have 8 designers around the table, and we don't have a set decorator, we don't have a prop master, we don't have a graphic designer, we don't have anybody who's doing the plans. So my workshop was about what everybody does in the department. And 10 days later, they said, oh, I don't want to be a head of department. That doesn't feel right. I want to become a set decorator. That suits me so much more. And somebody else said, oh, I didn't know it was that difficult. I want to do construction. I want to actually build the sets, but I don't want to talk to the big heads and sell them my idea. I cannot do that. That doesn't make me feel comfortable. So it's really finding out what suits you and what your chemistry allows you to be and what your chemistry allows you to become. And on that note, I've just been to the production designers gathering in Greece, where every 2 years, 250 designers from all around the world meet and exchange ideas and how everybody works. And we had 2 panels in the morning and 2 panels in the afternoon. And the entire conference was going on for 4 days. And there were a lot of film school graduates. And there was one panel on the last day in the afternoon, and the name of the panel was Stay Sane in the Industry. So there were designers who are 80 years old who have like 3 Oscars at home, and there were graduates from film school. So we really had people there from the age of 25 until the age of 80. We all shared the same experience. If you are not following your instinct, you go crazy in this industry. You have to learn how to look after yourself, because otherwise you will not be able to stay sane. Yeah. The industry eats you up if you don't watch it. So, and this is a long answer to a short question. I would like to encourage all the students, everybody who want to go into this industry, follow your instinct and really don't let anybody tell you what is good for you. You have to find out for yourself what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Correct. Safowa?
Well said.
Completely.
It's so true. And I do think that, you kind of fit into 2 boxes. In my case, like there's sometimes you have to realize that you're never going to, you're not made to have the path that is the traditional path, even if it's A or B, like you mentioned, or 1 and 2. And that's something that where I fit in. Like I've never fit in, whether it's the way I look or my upbringing or my name or, like I started off here and I pivoted here. And that's okay too. And I think that all of the steps that I took on my path to get to where I am And, you know, I've been on this planet a long time, okay? And, you know, I think that when I think of what I'm able to bring to costume design, a lot of it is my knowledge from fashion design.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to have an understanding of sort of the big picture. Maybe that comes from my love of architecture, because I'm looking at something as a whole many times, and or my love for art, going to a museum and leaving like almost trembling because I'm so inspired, and I need to figure out a channel to translate that inspiration. And all of the steps that I took, you know, I pathwise, where Knut said that he worked on, you know, things for free and small projects, and that is paramountly important. I think it's very, very important to hone your craft at that level, even if it's for a brief time, because what people don't realize, and what you don't realize as you move until you move up, is that when you get to that lead position, whether it's production designer, costume supervisor, where you're managing a huge millions of dollar budgets, that you have this burden on you to be able to execute things and have it run so smoothly that people don't even realize, right? All of those are immense amounts of pressure, and the buck stops at you. And I always joke, like, yeah, don't look behind you, because it's you. Like, if you know, whoever's gonna like send this stuff back and return it, I'm like, it's you. It's not. No one's behind you, you know. And then when it comes to leading a department and leading a crew, absolutely, the amount of pressure on you it's mind-boggling. Even though you don't have your hands in someone's chest cavity, and there isn't a beeping, and you're not keeping someone alive, you feel that way. The amount of pressure you feel, and especially in this day and age. And I think that there's not a lot of room for messing up. You are sort of like the spotlight is on you. Whereas when you are at the beginning of your career and you have the humility within yourself to realize, let me do this short film, let me do this independent project, let me help with styling this photo shoot, let me allow someone who's tenured and they can be my mentor, and just watch how they handle themselves. You might see a great thing, you might see something that you'll say, I don't want to handle myself that way in the future. All of that is irreplaceable, because you can make mistakes at that level. Not that you can't if you're leading a department and a crew, but there's a different burden on you, and there's a grace to that. And you don't realize that when you first graduate college.
Correct.
Or if you're at the beginning. You just want to be at the top. You want to skip steps. And although I don't believe in like staying in something 30 years and chipping your way up, I do believe that there's something, you might feel like it's forever, but it's really only a couple years. It's not that deep. And that allows you to hone your craft. So as you move up, you have a perspective and you make the right choices as you move forward. And I do believe that it's paramountly important to have a balance, to do something that you love, because as we all know, being in the industry, it is so time consuming and all consuming. You will be working many times 60, 80 hours a week, even if it's not the time that you're actually at the production, but how you're thinking and what you're thinking of before you go to bed. And that's why, Knut, you said you need to read something unrelated, so at least you will have a period of rest. And I think that so it's very important for you to do something that you love. It's also very important for you to be adaptable. And you need to be able to give yourself grace that maybe you wanted to do this for 5 years, but you realize, I actually think I love this. And it's okay. It's okay if you want to pivot, because sometimes when you pivot, you're actually able to kind of jump steps and you don't realize. Correct. And so I've always learned, I've always learned that I have a different path. Things I might have to work a little harder to achieve what I achieve, and that's okay. You know, you have to sometimes just own who you are, own the decisions you make, and always give yourself grace, and that will allow you sometimes to not be trapped in this bubble of beating yourself up and saying like, well, this is what I studied and this is a course I need to take. And hopefully that makes sense. But
It makes
that's all for
it
me.
makes complete sense, and I want to thank you both. That was the most in-depth, best answer to that question I've ever gotten. Literally, like it's usually like no. What I mean it is, people need to hear this, and students need to hear this. And I can tell that you both teach or you both mentor because they need to understand what that process is like and know the entire thing and know what it's like. For me, I'm going to tie everything that you guys said together with my own experience because it's similar, which is I started in production design. And by started in production design, it's what Knut said. Like I was a PA first, then I was like driving the truck, then I did set deck, like then I was like an art director. Like I kept moving up and kind of doing all the different jobs. I was a prop master for a while. So by the time I was actually in charge, I knew that job and I knew what everyone was doing. And it made me, to me, it felt like it made me a better leader because I could empathize and understood my crew, right? Like I knew what they were doing and I could help them along. I could tell the truck driver, go here, here, here. And he's like, how do you know this route? And it's like, because I've driven it, right? Like, it's like I know we'll be back in an hour, an hour's time earlier than you would be if you did some weird thing. So it'd be stuff like that. And then when I got into costume, it was a similar process where I was illustrating, but I was learning all about fashion and all about clothing and all about fit and all about all the different parts of the department until I got to a point when I was an ACD and now a costume designer. So it's like, I see those processes as being very linked, but also you do pivot. Like I remember on my first job as a costume illustrator, I was so excited because I got to work on a project where the production designer was Nigel Phelps. And so I'm like, I'm just following him around and I'm like, oh my gosh, like he did all these things. And I'm just watching him work. And consistently, Mr. Phelps would forget to eat. And then I was like, I don't know if I want to be a production designer. Like it seems really stressful. Like it made me really think about it, like the same thing you were talking about, where it was just like, man, you're so busy in managing all these things. I was like, this is not a part of the job that I saw. I only see the part where I'm like, you're designing the sets and you're doing these things, right? Costume designers, same thing. I watched some of the designers that I've worked for. They're doing all these amazing things, but they're also like psychiatrists and they're also managing other things and they're also going and having all these meetings. And I'm like, when are you going to design anything? And they're like, I don't know, because they have so many things to do, right? So I want to bring it back to what you guys have said. This is perfect advice for people that are looking to get in the industry, but also to know you have to love it. You have to be a self-starter. You can't sit back and be like, whose thing is that? It's your thing. You have to like really go for it. And you have to make a way for yourself and you have to like let people know that you're there and all of those things along with doing your best work. And of course, based on the conversation that we've had, I can tell you guys are both really kind and collaborative. I think the way you treat people is also a huge testament to how you can actually run things. So I think that that's also a big part of your overall commitment too, is like the relationships you form and how you speak. So I want to thank you guys very much for coming. This was an amazing episode. And I appreciate you guys kind of lending your foresight and your professionalism and kind of giving us an insight into how you guys created this beautiful piece of work. If you are at home, have not watched it, please do watch it. There's a lot of Spanish, so pay attention. Like, make sure you're paying attention. This is not a show that you can do other things. You must watch it unless you speak Spanish. And I want to thank you guys just for your artistry. I thought that the way that you guys work together, I think that I want people to look at these episodes and look at the collaboration that these two had together and really form your opinion on design based on this, because of the fact that when it works well, it works really well. And the collaboration process, the back and forth, the camaraderie, all of that showed up on screen. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes,
Bill, this was amazing.
Wonderful.
It was just wonderful. You're a great interviewer, and
I appreciate you both. Is there before we leave, is there anywhere that people can do you do social media at all? Is there anywhere that people can follow you? What do you have coming up next? Is there a place where people can see?
I have one other advice, and I wish I would have had that advice and these possibilities when I started off a couple of years ago. So nowadays you can write emails, and nowadays we have imdb.com, and you can look up contact details of everybody. Correct. It's either the agency or it's a direct contact, or it's like our friend Daria, that somebody has a publicist listed. So there are ways to contact people. And I do get applications ever so often. People said, "Oh, I want to work with you," blah, blah, blah. And I can always tell if this goes to 100 people at the same time or if it is really meant to go to me. So my advice to people, if you approach someone you want to get to know in the industry, please tell them why you approach them.
Yes.
If somebody tells me, I want to talk to you because I saw this show or I saw this or I read the article and your name came up, if I know why it is why they want to talk to me, I always answer the emails. But if I get an automated email where I can tell this is not about me, they have sent this to 50 other designers, I don't reply. So all of these people who work in the industry are human beings, and if somebody is nice and tells you why you are contacting someone, I'm sure in 80% of the cases you would get an answer. But tell people why you are approaching them.
And then
yeah, I agree. You can really tell when someone
Of course, we have Facebook and we have Instagram and I'm on LinkedIn, but it stresses me a little bit. So it was the advice of the agency that I need an Insta page because everybody has an Insta page. I said, okay, I do an Insta page.
Yeah.
But if somebody drops an email and I have the chance to answer it within the next couple of days, then this is what I do. I usually don't reply to social media. It's I'm so busy, I don't have time to do this.
That's what I was going to say. A lot of production designers I know are too busy for social media. They're too busy doing the actual job that social media shows, right? And costume designers, same thing. So
it's an occupation, and editors are pretty good at it because they are sitting at the desk and they go all day long. But I only know editors who frequently actually put out a post on an Insta page or some other outlet, but all the other people, I cannot be bothered.
I only recently, like this summer, forced myself again by the agency and publicists. They're like, you need to do this, Safowa. There's voting. There's this. I'm like, oh. So I do have Instagram, and it's my very long name, but there's dot in between. So it's Safowa.Bright Bitzelberger. It has some interesting stuff on there. I'm definitely not, like Knut was saying, I wish I was better about, posting things. I think you're really good about it, Phil. Okay. So I'm going to try and inspire, but at least there's something there, and I will reply. I actually, I finally put my notifications on. So if you send me a message through Instagram, I'll get it. I'm sure I'll get it within a day. If not, and I will reply. And some of the nicest messages have come in through Instagram, where someone's just said like, "Oh, I just watched this and it looks so great, and I'm so inspired," or it's something I have to adapt to because I'm definitely dating myself. I've been on this planet a long time, but I'm adapting. Again, just can I say that? I'm adapting, and social media, I'm trying to use it as a helpful tool.
To our audience, make sure you keep up and follow them wherever they are. Also, make sure that you take the advice that they just gave, which is a cold reach out or a cold email. I send them often as a professional, even though I'm working. I still send stuff. If I see something I like, I'll write, and I write specifically to the person, and it does help you get work. And they more than often will write you back. So make sure you guys are following them. I'm going to thank our guest again for coming to the show, and a special thank you to founder, CEO, executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer Marilyn Vance, and John Campea. And thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and like our YouTube channel, and tune into the audio version wherever you can listen to podcasts. You can follow me at Phil_Boutte. Yes, my name is Boutte. If it's not funny, you're not saying it right. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.